today we are going to be talking about Jensen Huang.
He comes across like a guy who came out of a meditation retreat.
This is unheard of in Silicon Valley. The company value has gone from like 1 billion to 2 billion in less than a year.
The world is pretty reliant on those Nvidia chips. What kind of investment are you making on the leadership level? And what are you getting from the quality of leadership that you have in the company?
People with very high expectations have very low resilience. I show people how to reason through things all the time.
You have to be a human being. If you're working really hard to appear flawless to your team, it's not useful. That they don't get anything from that. They don't feel safe because they don't feel like it's okay to be human. Hello, awesome humans. I'm Chuck.
And I'm Andrew.
And we are the Mindful Business Alliance, and we're committed to making work suck less.
Or as we like to say, humanizing the workplace. And today we are going to be talking about Jensen Huang. So we're going to talk about Jensen Huang in quotes. Now, Jensen Huang is the co-founder and the president and CEO of Nvidia, which was founded in 1993, but has been in the news a lot in the last few years. So what do you say, Chuck? A lot, yeah.
I'm excited to do this one. You know, Nvidia has been getting a lot of attention. It's kind of amazing how they have come to be the company they are. And I'm sure that Jensen Huang has a lot to do with their quick rise to success.
I think it does. And actually, you know, he's been CEO for more than 3 decades, which is something that even the Wall Street Journal talk about. You know, they're like, this is unheard of in Silicon Valley. The company value has gone from like 1 billion to 2 billion in less than a year. And he's now a celebrity of Silicon Valley.
Yeah. And with everything happening with AI and the growth of AI, the world is pretty reliant on those Nvidia chips to drive AI, and it's only going to grow.
Yep. They're everywhere. So it's super interesting. And he's a really interesting guy. And he was kind of unknown a few years ago. There was an article, I forget which one it was, I read, where they said something like, if you've never heard of Jensen Huang and Nvidia, you know, that's okay. But today, they are in the top 4 of biggest companies in the Fortune 100. Even Fortune magazine recently had an article about them being the Fortune 500's best-led company. Can you imagine? Coming out of nowhere, and today, best-led company according to Fortune. What do you think of that?
It's impressive. And again, I think it starts with leadership, like we always say.
It really does. Yeah. They talked about strong leadership fundamentals. They talked about him, you know, really setting the business up for long-term success. They talked about him doing a sterling job steering the boat. So let's jump in because...
Absolutely.
I mean, you know, a lot of CEOs are abandoning their purpose, right, for short-term gains. And they're often abandoning their values as well because of external pressure. But not Nvidia, it seems.
No, and I think what's interesting to watch Jensen Huang when he's interviewed, a few things catch my attention. One is that he seems kind of unbelievably placid. Usually when people are in front of a group or crowd and a big audience, they kind of have the sense of like, yeah. And he is like, he looks like he's just come out of a meditation retreat. Like almost always. He just seems so calm. He doesn't smile a whole lot, which I think is also interesting. He just seems very sincere about what he's saying. And so as a listener, I'm just very pulled in when I hear him talk, because he tends to say these things that are kind of surprising and iconoclastic with a very calm expression on his face. Like he's not said anything important, even though he just has.
Right. And it's super interesting because he also has the rock star look with his sort of trademark, you know, black leather jacket and so on. But you're right, like very gentle, very calm. Yeah, they are winning at the leadership game, it seems. And it's definitely worth us taking a look because they've rocketed up. I think there's the return on leadership metric, which is something that Fortune publishes in partnership with Indigo. They look at the top 100 companies in the Fortune 500, and they have a metric which, not going to lie, I don't understand how it works, I have to say, but it evaluates and quantifies key fundamentals that are about diminishing risk and increasing success. And Microsoft held it previously. And Nvidia is new to this, and they came straight in at number one.
Yeah, I don't know that anyone understands return on leadership, but in first glance, I think it's a cool thing that they're actually looking at this. Like, it's not just how many dollars you're pouring into a company; it's actually what kind of investment are you making on the leadership level, and what are you getting from the quality of leadership that you have in the company. So I think it's a great question to start with, and it's again, it kind of is rule breaking just in terms of how we normally think about business.
Yes. Well, uh, definitely they made the top spot based on their scores around things like strategic clarity, leadership alignment,
Sure.
um, and how they were focusing on action. So, yeah, it's interesting. Also, interesting to note, they did not make it because of their share price, because the value of the company is not one of the metrics that they use. So, even though they were up almost 200% in the 12 months leading up to this, the share price actually has nothing to do with it. So, super interesting. And you said something about his style.
Yes.
I wanted to pick on that a little bit more.
He comes across like a guy who came out of a meditation retreat. He just looks
Right.
so calm when he's speaking in front of these groups, and interviewers are often asking him tough questions and even challenging his points of view, because his points of view are unconventional. His
Yes.
approach to leadership is unconventional. So he'll just say these things like, I don't believe in doing what everybody else does. Well, he doesn't even say it that way. He says, I don't believe in doing what everybody else does. And then there you could feel the crowd going, what? And the interviewer saying, what? So it's fun to watch,
It
actually.
is. It is. I think it was on 60 Minutes. I was watching him, and the question was something like, "Some people have said that you're demanding and hard to work for. What do you say to that?" And he was like, "Correct." And he
Oh,
was saying like it
yes.
shouldn't be easy. Being successful shouldn't be easy, right? And I think the theme in most of his public talks and interviews seems to be we should question the way things are typically done.
But I'm so curious to actually talk to people who work directly with him.
Mm.
That would be really interesting, because I don't, even though he looks really zen when he's talking, I don't think it's a zen environment.
Mm.
I have a feeling it's probably a high stress environment. There's a lot of demands on very brilliant people, and I think he is really committed to getting the best out of them. But I don't imagine that it's stress free. I would be surprised.
Mm. Yeah, I think Business Insider wrote about him, and they said something like he has it's like a combination of a demand for intellectual honesty, high expectations, and what was it? He said like a relentless pursuit of perfection.
Mm,
But I think, and this is where the leadership and the sort of humanity piece comes in for me. If you're a decent person, I don't think it's hard to actually pull that off because you're doing
mm.
it for the sake of something bigger. So I
Yeah,
think there's a lot we could learn from Jensen Huang.
yeah, and yeah. On the other side, I don't imagine he's one of those coffee mug throwing bosses either. I don't imagine that he's you know getting caught up in random rage fits, like
Mm, mm.
like the stereotypical Hollywood boss. I don't. I would be surprised if he's that kind of guy.
Yeah, me too. Me
Right,
too.
but I do think, yeah, like you're saying, I think he probably does demand perfection. And it is interesting when we start talking about the quotes that we're going to be looking at today. It will be interesting to kind of look at how do these drive the best results out of
Mm,
out of the workforce.
yes. Well, let's take a look at Jensen Huang in quotes.
All right.
So, number one that we've been looking at here is people with very high expectations have very low resilience.
I love this one. What it does is it makes some assumptions about who is coming into this work, both socioeconomically and generationally. And what he's saying is, if you are, if you're, let's say, for example, raised in a family where your parents take care of everything and protect you from any kind of adversity, all you will have is high expectations. You will not anticipate failure or disappointment because all you've had is a glide path to success. So why would you expect something different? You're going to have very high expectations. And that also means you are going to have very low resilience. You will not be able to handle challenge, failure, disappointment very well. You're likely to fall apart. So
Mm.
that's my assumption about what he means by this. What would you say?
Yes, I. It makes me think of an interview I read about him. I don't remember the source, but he spoke about how much he and his two co-founders struggled with the early days of building their business, and he talked about how overcoming those things actually builds character. Right, so it's not that character comes from being smart. He talks about character being formed from people who've suffered in some way, and I don't think he means like, physical pain, but rather the challenge and the maybe the heartache or the heartbreak of trying things and failing, or maybe struggling with cash flow or not having investors or running up against problems that they didn't anticipate. Uh, so I think for
Yeah.
me, it's. I think he means it from a character building perspective.
Yeah, I think what he's saying is you've had life experiences.
Yes.
And this is I'm going to give a generational example. when when I was growing up, we were in a little suburban neighborhood. We had hours and hours most days of being unsupervised by adults. We would just ride our bikes around to the park or, into the open fields where we could, go down hills and hurt ourselves even. And those hours and hours of unsupervised play, I think we got a lot of character was built from those
Mm,
things.
yeah.
Meanwhile, in the same neighborhood now, there are kids who aren't even allowed to cross the street, like 10, 11-year-old kids who've never crossed the street without an adult at their side, who are never without adult supervision. And like, I don't want to tell people how to raise their kids, but there is a difference in, like, for example, how I was at 11 and how modern kids might be at 11, especially in an urban environment. I think we're really different.
Mm. Yeah, so I think there's something to be said here for like the experiences people have in life will help to grow them. And yeah, something to keep in mind, right? People with high expectations have very low resilience. All right. So we have another quote, a Jensen Huang quote. Number two, I show people how to reason through things all the time. I was super fascinated by this one.
Mm.
This one for me was, I think there's a lot here. Part of it was, I think, transparency, vulnerability, right? So to be a leader who can show people how you think, how you process information, how you use reason and logic. But I think there's something here as well about allowing people to see you struggle, being yourself, because he would appear to be very big on sort of a flat org community type of work environment. So he wants to hear from people. And the impression I get from him is that he wants people to also learn from each other all the time. And he includes himself in that. So letting people see him struggle, mentoring people in this way, teaching them about how to be your authentic, real self. I think this is super fascinating. What do you make of it?
Yeah, well, I think when we do leadership training and we focus on authentic leadership, this is one of the key points that we focus on. Transparency. And of course, we have the transparency conversation. And a lot of leaders will like, I don't want to get too close to my direct reports. I don't want them to know too much about me. I don't like they're very nervous
Mm,
about I think the honestly the intimacy that could show up in these working relationships if you're vulnerable, if you're really transparent. And I think a couple of things for me show up about this that make it really important. One is you have to be a human being. if you're working really hard to appear flawless to your team, I don't, first of all, that's not useful. That they don't get anything from that. But second of all, they don't feel safe because they don't feel like it's okay to be human. So they do need to see some humanity from you. And like you use the word struggle, I think it's really important for workers to see their boss struggle sometimes, just to know it's okay. Um, and one of the things I think is also really important is if you're really going to solve a problem, one of the first stages of problem solving is confusion. Like if you're not confused, you don't understand the problem. So to be confused or overwhelmed at the beginning and to actually indicate that to people who are watching you, I think that's really important.
I think there's a Chuck quote right there. If you're not confused, you don't understand the problem. I think we should remember that for another recording.
Okay, that sounds good.
Yeah. No, I think you're right. I think it's sort of allowing space for the complexity of being a human, right? And you named it too, like such a waste of energy and effort to try to be flawless anyway. So creating an environment where that is perfectly acceptable and normalized, I think would be really significant. And I'm sure it goes a long way to why they are coming out on top at the moment.
Absolutely. And I think the other place I'd point is the opposite behavior. So what a lot of managers do is they solve problems out of sight of their team.
Yeah.
So what does that do? It doesn't help the team understand your thinking. So if they're having trouble aligning with your decision, they don't know how you got there because they didn't watch it happen. And then once you reveal your decision, they might have a bunch of questions and you might have to educate them anyway.
Yes.
So letting them watch you solve problems in real time, I think is one of the most effective forms of leadership. And what it also does, it's a form of mentoring. It trains people in how to think through problems. So I think there's only good that could come out of it.
Yes. All right. So Jensen Huang, another quote we have. I think you're going to like this one. I don't believe in a culture or an environment where the information that you possess is the reason why you have power.
Yeah. So this one seems like an important redefinition of leadership. So I think, first of all, on the dark side, I do think a lot of people in companies who are sort of desperate to either hold on to a level of control or status, or maybe they've learned that this is how leadership works. They hold information very tightly. They
Mm.
don't share it. And it keeps people dependent on them. It has them feel special. It's a lot like micromanaging. And I mean, it's the same kind of control. Like if I don't control this, then maybe I'm not special.
Knowledge should not be about power, right? And this is also such an important thing for people to be learning, especially when they're growing and being mentored by leaders, right? I've heard him speak around this topic in ways that suggest like management teams exist to be in service of all the people who work in the company. Think about that, right? Most people would say management teams exist to, create shareholder value and to grow the business.
Mm,
And he comes at it really sort of looking through the other end of the jar in a way, right? They are there in service of all the people who work in the company. They want to create conditions for people to choose to work for you. And he said something like, instead of all the other amazing high-tech firms out there. Like
right.
he sort of looks at this with a really sincere humility that it is a privilege to have these people come and choose to work for Nvidia rather than go elsewhere. And
Yeah.
I like imagine that.
Yeah. Well, I'm imagining this. Like, imagine that you have intentionally hired the best people you could find, and in some cases, even poached them from competitor companies because you want the best people, the most qualified, the most knowledgeable to work inside your company. So, all right, great. You've won. You've got really good team members. You've got really good leaders in your company. Now, what do? Do you withhold information from them so that they can't do everything that they want to do? Do you make things really hard for them? Or do you just share with them everything so that they have all the resources that are possible?
It
So
seems,
yeah.
yeah, yeah. It seems so simple, right? And it's like it kind of blows my mind that more people are not doing this. Creating the conditions in which people can, I think he says it like, they can do their life's work.
So again, like, what is the purpose? It kind of another version of the question you were asking. What is the purpose of having really great people work for you? And and what he's saying here is the purpose is so that they can achieve their dreams. They can achieve their full potential. So why would you make it harder for them to achieve their full potential?
Mm,
And the other thing that I think is crucial here is he is I think he's very, very pro flat as as a way to run a company. He really likes to flatten out the power structure because he doesn't see the benefit in multiple layers of power, especially when you have really good people working for your company. And I think this is also really important.
you're right. I think last time I looked, I think he has something like 50 direct reports. That's an extraordinarily small team of people considering the size of the
Mm-hmm.
business. Um, what I don't know yet, but I would definitely get curious about is the way in which they structure promotions. The reason I say that is one of the things that gets in the way of this kind of open information culture is often the fact that there are only a certain amount of roles available for people to move into. The further people go up the pyramid, the less roles there are. So even if we say we're working together, we're working as a team, we have to row this boat in the same direction for everybody, but only a few of you can get promoted. Only a few of you can get a bonus. Some of you need to get bad scores in your annual appraisal. That whole thing that you and I run into so often in some of our client engagements. I'd be curious to know how that part of the business works because my hunch is they don't do it like that
No,
because it's impossible to have these outcomes if you do.
I think that, so I don't know. Again, we don't have all the details here. We're not on the inside, but I think that they are probably doing what I don't even remember the name of this, but there's a theory that I've been very intrigued with recently about rewarding individual contributors and having a structure in your organization to honor individual contributors and to give them a growth path that doesn't give them managerial power. And so let me explain this because I think it might be a little confusing. What typically happens in companies is you're given this incentive of if you're good as an individual contributor, you will be rewarded with leadership. Like we will make you a team leader, we will make you a manager, and then you'll keep going to director level and then VP. So there are greater and greater levels of power that you're given over other people in the company. You know, so part of what happens is a promotion equals you supervise more people. Moving up means you have a greater and greater team below you. More and more people are under you. And what this other philosophy is saying is let's not do that because a lot of individual contributors are sucky leaders of people and they don't want to do it anyway because
Mm,
plenty of people, actually really good individual contributors, have no interest in leading other people. They just want to do the work that they love. So why not make that okay? And and give them ways to get promoted that don't involve people leading
mm,
or
yeah.
involve less people leading. So I think that would be my hunch is that's what he's doing.
Mm. I do think it's definitely the right approach, and I do think it is the way forward to keep holding this sort of sense of community and more flat, definitely.
Mm-hmm.
All right, here's another one. I really discourage one-on-ones,
And doesn't that relate to what we were just saying?
right?
Because if you have 50 direct reports, you have a team of 50, you can't really do one-on-ones with all of them, at least not very often.
Mm-hmm.
And what do we hear from leaders all the time when we're training them in being being a more human leader? The first thing is, I really need more one-on-ones and I don't have time for those. So it's what a lot of people struggle with.
Yeah, and well, the other the knock on effect of that is people are constantly in meetings, so they don't have time for anything else.
Oh my gosh. Meeting hell,
Yeah.
and so many unnecessary meetings. And so the
Yes.
other thing is also, there are the one-on-ones, which are hard to schedule because there's only limited amounts of time in a day. But then there are also all the unnecessary meetings that people have to attend.
Yes,
So
those are
how do
the
you, yeah.
that could have been an email meeting
Oh my gosh.
meetings, right?
Yeah, I saw one on Instagram the other day. It's like, this wasn't even an email. this meeting, none of this should have happened. Right.
That's great. But
Yeah.
yeah, like this idea of discouraging one-on-ones, like it gets people out of silos, it gets people more in community, a lot more cross-functional collaboration. And I know that
Mhm.
he seems to be quite a fan of, if everybody gets the information all the time, then information hoarding becomes taboo. Like there's nothing I would need to say to you that wouldn't be said to the group.
Absolutely. This has me think a lot about, like, what are leaders complaining about a lot? A lot of times they're talking about the problems with siloing. Oh, people are just working in little silos. They don't talk to each other. They don't share information. They don't collaborate. And I'm always thinking, why? Because ultimately, people wouldn't behave that way if there weren't incentives for behaving that way. So if people get rewarded for, let's say, um, not sharing information, if there's benefit they see to that, like here's an example. If I can get recognized for being the one that came up with this idea, even if you helped, why would I give you credit? So where I would go with this is, why are managers, leaders, not rewarding collaboration? If I share the credit with you, that should go noticed by my leader and your leader. Like, they should notice that we're doing that, that we're sharing credit. Because what that does is it breaks down the silos.
Yes, and I think that my hunch here is that that's probably one of the main drivers of this. If you're having one-on-ones, you only ever have two voices, two memories. But if these kind of conversations are happening in groups, then it is easier to share. It is easier to spot collaboration. It is easier to see where cross-functional uh, interactions are working. Well, information hoarding becomes taboo.
Yeah. And I also wonder, in an approach like this where he discourages one-on-ones, he does a lot of probably a lot of meetings where many people are attending. I also wonder, how do they keep those meetings efficient? Like, at a certain point, if I'm one of those 50 team members reporting directly to him, and we're on a group call together, can I just go, excuse me, I don't think I need to be here for this? And then can I log off the call and go do something that is important or urgent? I wonder about this. How does
I
it,
do,
what's the
yeah.
what's the culture around that?
That's a super fascinating question. I know he's not a fan of status updates. He finds it kind of redundant, and it can make people, people can skew the updates to look good and so on and so on. So I think he's more a
Mm,
fan of the give me the five things that we need to be focusing on. But yeah, I would also wonder about that. This kind of makes me think about. There's one more quote I would love to get in here,
yeah.
and I think it sort of fits into what we were just saying. I will give you feedback right here in front of everybody. What do you think of that?
Oh, I can hear people like screaming, thinking about what that could be like. And I think a lot of people would say that sounds very unsafe. That's probably the first response a lot of people
Mm,
have, is like, oh
mm.
wow, I don't know that I would be able to handle that, or oh, he really shouldn't do that because that feels really unsafe.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the first response I have. Yeah.
Yeah, I totally relate. I think I could totally go down that road as well. Here's what it makes me think. It's going to come down to the mindset, right? So if I'm giving you feedback in front of everybody to diminish you, make you look small, embarrass you, whatever, clearly psychological safety is not being held, and that is an issue. I would imagine HR phones are ringing off the hook. But if you have a culture that says we're going to grow together, then everybody can learn from this in one time. And sort of back to the not having one-on-ones. And I think he said something like, for what reason are you the only person who should learn?
Mm-hmm.
But it does, I think, to your point, right? It's got to be done well. It's got to be done safely. Psychological safety has to absolutely be held in integrity here. Otherwise, people are going to get hurt. But again, I'd love to talk to people who work there and see how is this in reality. But I think
Yeah.
as an idea, if he's giving people feedback in order to do better, get a product out quicker, whatever, get better test results, then it shouldn't be personal. It should be about the tactical or the practical. But yeah, I'd be curious to know what people on the inside have to say about this.
Yeah. Well, it makes me go back to the basics of like, what is feedback for?
Mm,
Is it to control people or shame them, or is it to grow them? Because then if it's to grow people, why wouldn't you do it publicly?
yeah.
So imagine you made a mistake. If I'm your boss, I could pull you aside and I could tell you what the mistake was, and we could have a conversation about what you could learn from that. But we have other people on the team too. So why should, kind of to your question earlier, why should you be the only person that gets to learn from that mistake? Why
Mm,
not
mm.
let everybody learn from that mistake? And the only reason is because you might be embarrassed or ashamed. So I'm going to deprive the whole team of learning to protect you from shame. It's interesting, right?
It
And
is.
and it makes me wonder also what their interviewing and onboarding process is, because if I have this as one of the attributes of my company's culture, I'm going to be watching in interviews for how delicate people appear to be. And if they seem a little bit touchy or sensitive about receiving any kind of feedback, I might not want them.
This is right back to our first quote, low resilience, right?
Exactly, right. Because resilience is being able to to say, "Oh yeah, okay, I got that wrong. Let's together learn from this."
Let's do
Right.
something with it. Yes, absolutely.
The other thing that occurs to me is, who is he hiring for these leadership roles? A lot of them are highly skilled technicians, scientists. These are people who they want to know if they get something wrong. They want to know what is right and true. That's the whole pursuit of science. So you want someone to come at you to attempt to falsify your result. It's part of how the process goes. You
Mm,
understand this.
mm. What a super interesting discussion. I would love to get to know a little bit more from the inside here. So maybe that's something we should put out there to say, hey, if you're an insider at Nvidia, come and help us figure out how right or wrong are we on some of our hunches here. Um, we
Yeah.
definitely have a leader I want to be keeping an eye on over the next few years. I think he's up to some really good stuff. I would love to see how does their productivity continue to grow. What are people saying about them 2 years, 5 years from now? Because I do think the style of leadership that he's working with is definitely part of the future.
Yeah, I'm very curious to see how this this approach to leadership and or even organizational structure, how it catches on and spreads through various industries, because I think a lot of industries can benefit from this if they're willing to try it.
I
I
agree.
hope it works. I hope it happens.
I hope it happens. I would love to see Nvidia still in the news, in 5, 10 years from now, doing a great job at humanizing the workplace.
and maybe even humanizing AI. Let's see, we can hope.
Ooh la la. All right, well, it's been fun talking about Jensen Huang with you, Chuck.
That's all for now.
Stay safe, stay kind.
And stay human.